District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program. Welcome to District of Conservation. I'm your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Welcome to Season 7, everyone. Pardon the absence. As you know, I was vacationing in Lithuania, where my parents are from, and I have a great report back to you on some of the cool outdoor stuff I did, even though imperfectly, and then some of the wildlife I did see in Lithuania, and some observations I have about European environmental policies, conservation policies versus the US, some of the same struggles both continents face, and why I think if we elect certain people, we could become like Europe, and that would not be a good thing, specifically Western Europe. If you elect a Kamala Harris-like candidate to the presidency, we could very much be on that same trajectory. Lithuania, as I've talked about here on the program, is a very nature-heavy country. There's not really much of mountains. There's lots of rolling hills. There's forests. There's the ocean, specifically the Baltic Sea, lots of rivers that run through the country all over. And there's a lot of biodiversity. They have some really cool wildlife, especially cervid species. I did see a couple roe deer. They have a plethora of fishing opportunities, hunting opportunities, although they like to keep a tight lip on both of them. It was pretty challenging. I wasn't hunting this trip. It was really challenging to find a fishing charter in the Lithuanian Spit, which is right on the opposite side of the Baltic Sea. When you're looking at the Baltic Sea, the Lithuanian Spit is like in between Klaipėda, where my mom is from, and the province of Neringa, where there's little towns called Nida, Jotkranta, and some others, where I spent some time where much of the fishing that I was able to do happened. We opted instead of going with a charter because this one charter was very confusing about payment. It would have been too much of a headache. So we opted to do-it-yourself fishing in Lithuania. And let me tell you, every country is different, but how we were able to do-it-yourself fishing first, and then I'll talk about some foraging that we did, which we had a much better result with, in my opinion. But I still was able to say that I caught some fish. I don't recall the species in particular, but we were fishing on the Lithuanian Spit when we were in Jotkranta, which is a town on this province of Neringa. It's home to different national parks and natural preserves, more specifically. And we were fishing on a boardwalk where a lot of boats go to dock off in the Lithuanian Spit to either do charters or commute or travel, boating, what have you. Similar to here in the United States, it's not totally foreign in terms of what activities they do. There's a lot of commonality there. So we did some fishing. We didn't have the best tackle either. So it sounds like a series of unfortunate events of fishing. But even with our very limited tackle, we had one rod. And I'm going to speed it back up a bit in terms of what the process is to obtain a license in Lithuania. So it's very different from here. It's a little more restrictive if you're a non-resident, especially if you do it online. So you all know, who have bought a hunting or fishing license here in the U.S., we have a pretty easy system to do. So you go to whatever state you're traveling to. If you already have a hunting, fishing number, ID, whatever, you have to use your social security number. And you have to do the same in Europe too. But you use your social security number, birth date, all the info. Very easy then to purchase what you want to purchase. Have it right at your disposal. Lithuanian's a little trickier because if you don't know Lithuanian, and I've heard it my whole life, I'm not fluent, but I do know bits and pieces. I understand it more than I can speak it, but it was too complicated to use the app. It wasn't very phone app friendly. It just wasn't helpful. So what you do if the app is too confusing for you in Lithuanian, I think maybe much of the other EU nations, those that are in EU, we went to the grocery store, one of the grocery stores. So they have lots of Lidls. They have a chain called Maxima. And we went to Maxima where we heard that it was easier to obtain it. So you go to a special place to buy gift certificates, whatever. And they also sell fishing licenses. And so what you do is you, of course, give all your specific information. You say you're in the United States. Do you know what I paid for one day? I think we got actually a 2-day license. So you pay €4 for each day. So we paid ultimately, I think it was €8, if I understood correctly. Really affordable to purchase a license in Lithuania. Again, just do like what you do here in the US. You have to provide your information, and you have to specify, I think, there, unlike here in the US, what region you're fishing in. I know some states have region-specific licenses. So Maryland has like a Chesapeake Bay versus a tidal basin versus like freshwater category. It's kind of similar there, but more even specific and segmented into regions. So you have to tell the grocery store attendant you're buying the license from what particular region, and they factor that in so they know that you are fishing in that particular area. We were using a traditional bait rod, and so we put worms onto hooks. We cast it a little bit. I don't recall the amount of feet I cast, maybe 20 feet away, really close to this impoundment and this dock that we were fishing from. And I believe some of the species we caught were like little perch. I believe there's a species called the roach. There's also bream. And I think what I caught was very closely aligned with the smelt, like our delta smelt or so, because they were really tiny. We didn't really catch anything super big or super brag-worthy just because, again, the wrong tackle setup and all that. And so it makes it harder when you don't have the right rod, a small hook, and inadequate tackle to be able to catch the fish you're intending to catch. I was hoping to catch a perch, pike perch. The pike perch is called a zander there, but even with this introductory experience of fishing there, I was pleased at least to have caught something. To come away totally empty-handed would have been a little embarrassing for someone as seasoned as me. But I think going forward, if I am going to fish in Lithuania in the future, there's great salmon fishing opportunities, particularly in the freshwater streams and rivers close to Vilnius, which is where my dad is from. The Neris River is in particular a great area to go salmon fishing for trophy salmon. And that would be something I would love to do. It was a couple weeks before salmon season in Lithuania, so there was no possibility for us to go. But I would probably want to go back again, maybe sniff around a little bit, talk to some of the people who do salmon fishing. There are a couple, I wouldn't say charters, but a couple guide services and people who run some YouTube channels that go fly fishing across Lithuania in these particular rivers, targeting salmon. Bring my fly rod, bring my fly tackle with me, and try my hand at that. So I think I would do that next time. I would do a little more better research now. I know how to navigate the license system and have my own tackle, not rely on relatives' tackle, and see what goes on from there. But if and when I hopefully do return to Lithuania, I really want to check out that. Also, much like that, the hunting realm. I want to see potentially if I can go hunting. It just didn't work out in terms of that because, again, I think they don't really advertise hunting opportunities. There are a couple guide services, and I think the only thing you could really get were pigs. It was really hot, so I don't think the hunting would have been optimal. But I did see a couple roe deer. There was like a private deer farm. I think they were raising either fallow or roe deer. So if you have ever hunted Europe, I've never hunted Europe, but I have a lot of friends that have. There's red stag. There's lots of different species. You can even hunt wolves. I was watching one of the local TV programming, and they were talking about, believe it or not, like in Colorado, the pervasive problem of unmanaged wolves. But in Lithuania, they seemed a little more understanding, not as brainwashed as some of the people in Colorado who are like, oh, wolves are so cuddly. They have to be forcibly introduced by voters. They actually understood because of the threat they pose to livestock. And this was in a region of Žemaitija, which is near Klaipėda, kind of more north, bordering Latvia. So they have a wolf problem. A lot of similarities to the United States, but there's regulations, rules. Each are a little different from each country, but you could even have a stiff penalty if you're not properly licensed. So I'm glad I was properly licensed. Did catch and release mostly. I didn't keep anything. It wasn't worthwhile to do it. They were too little. You couldn't cook anything out of them. And for something that needs to grow more, you want to throw them back and let them grow. That's a maxim a lot of fly anglers, myself included, like to use. You all know, I like to put and take. I'm not shy about that because if you make a long trek, you should take some fish back with you, but where appropriate and required, catch and release is perfectly fine too. I don't think there's one wrong or right way to do it, but it's just being ethical and knowing what the rules are and regulations are for any type of fishing. But I'm hoping to do hunting too, maybe in the future. I would love to try like grouse hunting there. I think red deer or roe deer would be really cool. They have a pig problem, much like we do here in the US. So that'd be nice to help manage. And I think there are a couple other species that are a little different from us, but I think any of the deer species and some of the small game would be really cool to target. So I will come back to Lithuania God willing, and try my hand maybe more successfully to fish, and then maybe one day go hunting. We'll see what happens there. I want to talk briefly about foraging before I dip into kind of the compare and contrast between European countries and their environmental and climate laws too. And I'll talk again about the Curonian spit, about something interesting I saw about cormorants and what they're doing there, and actually lack thereof. But foraging, I think, was more successful than fishing. And I'm going to write about this for Canut magazine sometime at the end of the month, early October. You'll see a whole overview of this, my experiences of doing foraging and fishing in Lithuania, but much more successful in Jotkrynta doing this type of activity. And we were told that it was really dry. Obviously, it was super hot when we were there, very unseasonably warm for summer. It's usually a little more mild. We were told it's too dry to go mushroom hunting. You won't find anything. But we were going through the national forest there, actually the national park. It's not like a national park here. It's a little different. But it wasn't a national preserve or natural preserve, which is a lot more restrictive. You can't pick anything. But in Lithuania's national parks for many, many decades and all, they've encouraged people and they've allowed people to go foraging, and you have the option to do so. And so it's like a pastime. It's all over the Baltic Sea region, whether it's Germany on the coast, Poland, Lithuania, the other Baltics, Finland, Sweden, anything that has some sort of proximity to the Baltic Sea. All of us who have some sort of ancestry or claim to that region of the world, myself included, we come from long lines of mushroom hunters. I like to do the activity. I've done it several times now, especially in adulthood, and it's a lot of fun. And so we went to the nearby national park from where we were staying. And not only mushrooms, we found this really plentiful lingonberry patch. So we also were foraging not only for mushrooms, bullet mushrooms in particular, but also stumbled upon like a treasure trove of lingonberries, which we made into a jam. It was fantastic. And so what you look out for in this one, it wasn't like a heavily wooded forest where there are ticks, like here in the US, but they do have some wooded forests where there are some ticks, but this was more mossy. I have to recall the tree species we were able to find it on, but they were especially growing around moss, but again, not heavily wooded whatsoever. And I think they were pine trees as well, not birches. But there are over 400 edible mushroom species in Lithuania, if you didn't know that. They also have chanterelles and a couple others, but bullets are what we largely found. And there were a couple other, I can't recall off the top of my head, the particular species in question. But let me say, after finding it, and I found a couple big ones, I posted them on social media. There's going to be an overview post to kick off season 7 of the program today. And you'll see kind of a snapshot into the berries we found, the mushrooms we picked, some of the little pesky fish I caught and released, and some other really cool natural landscapes in Lithuania that I was able to include. But it was overall much more productive, surprisingly, to forage in Lithuania. So a write-up that I'm having, like I mentioned earlier in the program, there will be a more comprehensive write-up, and I will get all the specificities out there in terms of the topography, the ecology, how exactly do you identify and where do you locate bullets, and what are the best optimal seasons to do that, and then also talk about the misadventures of fishing I had on the Curonian spit. But mushroom hunting was done more so on the Baltic Sea side when it was around sunset time, maybe 8:30 the first time we did it, and then we did it midday and found even more. But it was right facing the Baltic Sea. It was incredible, beautiful backdrop. I wish I could do that again sometime soon. It was really memorable, but we found a lot of mushrooms and sauteed them, ate them. They're so good. People are really picky about eating the stems. I'm not. The stems were delicious, much like the tops. And obviously making sure people understand these are not psychedelic mushrooms. These are edible foraged mushrooms. I'm not into that kind of stuff. I would never promulgate that here on the podcast. If you do it yourself, hey, to each their own. But these are specifically edible mushrooms that you can put into your meat dishes or eat a standalone if you're vegetarian, what have you. But they're really good eating. Mushrooms have many innumerable health benefits. It's one of my favorite things to eat, to pair with meat or just to eat standalone. And that's what those of us who have Baltic heritage do. We like eating mushrooms. And finally, let's talk about kind of how the environmental attitudes of the EU a little bit differ from the United States. So I think the EU is pretty progressive, too much to my liking, if we're being honest. So they probably agree with a lot of like what the political left does here, but they're like 5 to 10 years ahead of the political left here in the United States, where they've put really aggressive measures, I think, in my opinion, that would not stave off any temperature changes according to the Paris Climate Accords. It's very costly and expensive. They've waged a war on agriculture under climate grounds. I saw so many wind turbines, onshore wind turbines in Lithuania. It made me sick almost. So some of them, unfortunately, have bought into that nonsense too. There was actually even reports of a GE Verona, I always forget the name, but it's a GE related or Siemens wind turbine collapse. And a couple of the collapses have happened in Lithuania, and people have sued to get some money back because of it not working. So you do see a little bit of the green agenda in Lithuania. I wouldn't say it's as overt in Eastern Europe as it is out west. They put a new directive to, I think you can only drink water bottles rather, that have the caps attached to it. It's not the most egregious, terrible policy. It was actually reasonable. I don't think we need to have dictates like that here in the United States, but it wasn't the worst annoying policy out there. When I went to Amsterdam for an extended layover and, was passing through London casually for a long layover, a shorter layover, but not a full long layover, but a couple hours layover, you could definitely see the carbon neutral, green messages more abundant there. I would say maybe in Vilnius, you would see a little bit of it. Like in the university, they're talking about lower your carbon footprint, yada, 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 kind of what you see in the United States. But even in a place like Vilnius, I guess that could be perceived as the most liberal. I wouldn't really call it liberal because Lithuania tends to be more conservative. But even in the areas where it may be more progressive, it wasn't as pervasive as, let's say, you find here in the United States. And again, in Western Europe, you probably would see a lot of similarities, but the universities and the usual enclaves, you'll see this climate message, but you don't see any crazy protesters or anything like that. The cities were pretty clean and spotless, minus graffiti on the buildings. Vilnius actually, in addition to being a really beautiful city with great food spots, you have different rivers that are over there as well. It's one of the greenest cities in terms of coverage from trees. And I loved that. I like whenever cities are able to, have some coverage with that. And so they have a goal of planting 100,000 trees, 10 million shrubs, and 300,000 climbing vines across 2 years. This is the Vilnius, Lithuania mission. Again, they kind of do buy into this climate change rhetoric. So Vilnius presents tactics to fight climate change, thousands of trees and millions of shrubs to be planted. The actual tactic here is not bad. I disagree with them trying to accord themselves with the climate change, notions of the Paris Climate Accords. But planting trees is good. Trees absorb carbon. Greenery is wonderful. It shouldn't be a controversial thing, but they always make it out to be such the case. So I forget what percentage of the city is covered by trees, but it's a good amount. It's 60%, I think. I saw that figure. It was in the high 60s, low 70s, somewhere in that neighborhood estimate. I think when cities have green coverage and it's not tied to a political agenda, that's great because I just hate seeing concrete all over the place. It's so ugly. But you have the Neris and the Vilnaya River, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, snaking their way through the city. It was really nice to walk there with different friends and just have some body of water there to walk by. It was really peaceful, running water, much cleaner than the United States. But my friends there were like, it's actually really polluted. You just don't see it. I'm just like, well, it looks cleaner than the Potomac. That's the standard I'm going by. So even in the cities, you see a consciousness. Lithuanians are really nature-focused people. That's just in their nature to be that way. And as long as they do it responsibly and not in a pushy way, and I think the way that they handle it, it is pretty okay. But you'll probably find some activists who are much like people here in the US and say, well, if you don't fight the climate crisis, you hate the environment. But I didn't encounter such people. I didn't really see such notions or, let's say, alarmist rhetoric, even in Vilnius, which, urban areas tend to be a little more progressive or a little more preservationist in their environmental thinking. So I didn't see anything of that sort, but I did see a lot of messages in Amsterdam and a little bit in London. So it's interesting culturally there. But I think if you go outside of the urban centers, you will even find in Europe that there are a lot of conservative people or true conservationist-minded people who don't buy this climate alarmist rhetoric. They like to go fishing. They like to go hunting. I will say we are really lucky here in the United States that we have an interesting cultural comparison. So the running joke is there's no air conditioning in Europe. That is largely true. I feel like in most places I went to in Lithuania, there was some sort of air conditioning unit. Most of my Airbnbs had them except for one, but you open the window and it's fine. But that's usually older buildings that aren't retrofitted with air conditioning. So unlike France, Lithuania has a lot more air conditioning units. So if you travel there, you shouldn't worry. Like I said, because they're not as totally bought into this like Western Europe is. they're meat-eating, loving people, so you're not really going to see much of this anti-meat rhetoric you find from a lot of climate activists here in the U.S. So you're safe to travel there if you love meat. Just be respectful, of course, like anything. That's a snapshot into my trip into Lithuania and Europe in general. I will have a more comprehensive overview across different venues, Substack, Town Hall, all that in the coming weeks. If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.